Welcome back to the hot seat. Today I'm talking to two seasoned advisors from Buzzacott, Rakesh Dabasia and Maggie Gonzalez. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, David.
So, Maggie, just coming to you first, you've recently contributed a chapter to a new book helping offshore trustees or those with offshore structures understand some of the latest tax changes, of which there have been many, and we're going to get into the discussion on some of the topical areas right now, but perhaps give us a flavour of the content of that chapter that you provided, and give us a sense of how you might work with trustees at Buzzacott on some of the topical issues of the day.
Yeah, thank you, David. Well, the book really covers all of the complexity of UK taxation of offshore trusts. So that's how settlors and trustees and beneficiaries are taxed. Because of the nature of an offshore trust, the revenue can't necessarily just tax the trustees with them being in an offshore location. So there's lots of legislation that then means that instead they will catch the settlor if they're UK resident, or beneficiaries who receive distributions or some kind of benefit from the trust. And year on year, they seem to decide that they're not getting enough, or people are finding ways of getting around some of the legislation. So we've seen huge changes over the years on how people are taxed. And where non-DOMs are concerned, there's gradually been a tightening, so that whereas 10, 20 years ago, non-DOMs could pretty much live off funds from an offshore trust with no tax. These days, it's much more difficult because any income and gains in the trust that they bring to the UK are almost certainly going to be subject to UK tax.
Well, that was when London was absolutely booming, wasn't it? Because, as you said, it was a complete free lunch on the tax side. Things have got much more complicated, and residence now has become much more of an issue, hasn't it? And mobility. But do you think that advisors in the offshore centres, some jurisdictions obviously have a firmer grip on the UK regulations, for example, than others? Do you tend to find, or do you tend to find there's consistent levels of knowledge around the world now, given how new regulations have been introduced and there are fewer opportunities for people to ignore them and not engage with them?
I think it's quite varied. In the very well regulated offshore centres, like for instance the Channel Islands, trustees tend to have a reasonable grasp of the issues that they might be facing, but all of those trust companies would look to separate tax advisors to look at the specific detail relating to the trusts that they're dealing with, because a difference of just one fairly minor element can make a huge difference to how the trust or the beneficiary or the settlor is taxed. And it's so easy, if you're not really into the detail, to miss something or to be caught out. And I've seen many trustees who haven't kept their tax advice up to date come up against some really quite significant tax liabilities, where it's all something that's gone on in the past, and it's very difficult to then go back and try and do something to mitigate those charges. So a lot of the time it's a case of trying to present that to HMRC in the best light and to make a case for reducing penalties and allowing them to get back up to date without completely destroying the value that they're looking after.
And tax authorities, I guess, are increasingly trying to make the professional trustee as well, like on the hook for understanding some of these regulations. Does that must make an impact as well on how trustees manage risk within their business, and tax being a major component of that?
I think it does. Most reputable companies these days would look for tax advice as they take on a new client, because they want to understand right from the start how tax is going to impact their structure. So definitely, but you still see trustees who have no idea about the UK side. often happens where you perhaps have a trust that's not really being designed at all with anything to do with the UK in mind. So we have a large client base of US individuals at Buzzacott, and I frequently see an individual receiving a distribution from a US trust where no thought at all has been given to the UK tax issues. And then the trustees are surprised that there would be any UK tax involved, even though they know they've got beneficiaries in the UK who are paying tax here. And they would naturally, you would imagine, at least ask the question, but
So
they seem oblivious.
That's when things come to light, I guess, is if a trust is merrily sort of rolling up, being managed offshore offshore trustee in another location, it's not necessarily come to light. But when that UK resident beneficiary says, oh, actually, I've got a liquidity need, or something like COVID comes along, and they want to take £1 million from the trust, then all of a sudden the advisors are looking at it saying, oh, well, actually, the tax cost of that distribution is going to be a shock to them. And I guess then also they might look at the broader setup of the trust and think, oh, actually, we might have 10-year charges in here. We might have other hidden. So for the trustees, what are the sort of nasty surprises that might come out in terms of, stockpile gains or 10-year charges? What are the things, the red flags they should really be looking for?
Well, I think the big change most recently is on the inheritance tax side, because so frequently a non-dom will have perhaps taken a loan from an offshore trust to buy their main residence in the UK. And suddenly those trustees are being faced with inheritance tax charges following the changes back in 2017. So they have no idea that making a loan will bring them into that sort of charging regime. And because there's this tail which keeps the proceeds of that loan, even if it's paid back within the inheritance tax regime for a further 2 years, they can still find that they've got a charge if maybe their 10-year anniversary comes up within that period, even though the loan has gone. So it can be quite tricky, particularly as often the individual hasn't got the funds to repay the loan. So it's a question of just having to bear it. And particularly for American trustees, I think that's quite alien to them, because estate taxes in the US are just so differently structured, with such a huge exempt amount that individuals have.
And often the books and records of this structure, particularly the historic structures, are they often lacking. And in your job, you're computing as well. You're trying to find, right, what's historic book values and things like that of a variety of assets and piecing it together. It's not like the records are just ready on tap to analyse.
That's right. Sometimes we have to go all the way back to 1998 to work out capital gains, offshore income gains, and the income. We can go back even further. It's useful that we had rebasing in 2008, which sometimes can mean that where it's a non-dom who's receiving benefit, we only have to go back there. But even that's now becoming quite a long time ago, and the records are not necessarily available to the extent that you would want in order to do the calculations. So sometimes we have to look at what records we do have and try and make some reasonable assumptions and estimates, and then present them to HMRC and justify, why these would be reasonable estimates of what the gains might be, what the income might be within the trust, so that we can then establish what the charges might be for the beneficiary.
Is working with the offshore wealth managers, it's sometimes a challenge that they've invested the underlying funds of the trust in a variety of ways, using funds that aren't necessarily tax efficient in the UK or different things like that. Does that feature, so not for the property assets, but for the financial assets, does that often also throw up complexity on the computation side.
Well, yes, just as if an individual who was resident in the UK had some of these less traditional assets in their portfolios, it can be quite difficult with an offshore trustee to establish how we should treat some of these investments. And even once you know how you should do it, getting the information is another challenge, because quite often if you've got something that is transparent and you are supposed to look at what is within all the underlying transactions, that information may just not be available. So sometimes there's not that much that you can do other than take the reporting that's been provided and, you know, try and make the best of it.
And with the HMRC, then you would kind of present where information is incomplete. You're kind of just presenting your estimate, not estimate, but you know, your computation justified in the way with available information, and the revenue will if that's presented properly, presumably just they does that lead to challenge, or do they really just accept if it's prepared in a reasonable way?
If you present a reasonable case, they will accept it. They are looking to get a result for themselves, obviously, but they fully understand that it's not always possible to do all those calculations. And provided it seems reasonable, then they will go along with what you've done. But I think it's very important then that the people who are doing the calculations, presenting the information, have some kind of credibility with HMRC. So Absolutely. The relationship with HMRC is also very important.
Do you also see an increase in HMRC querying domicile kind of claims, or is that sort of as it has been, or do you notice any increase or decrease in HMRC looking at people's domicile status where there might be a lot of tax at stake?
I haven't personally seen that much, but I have heard from other advisors that they've seen an increase in domicile investigations, and that HMRC have asked such a lot of questions, most of which are just not relevant for that client. So it's a bit of a scattergun approach that they seem to take, in that they will ask every possible thing they can think of, and then you have to try and put together a response that will show them what's relevant and what isn't.
I mean, do you think the increased complexity in the tax rules around non-doms have made it less attractive to kind of invest or come to the UK? I mean, various reliefs have been introduced to try and bring the wall of capital that is held offshore into the UK. I mean, to what extent do you see like those reliefs being used? Do you think the complexity overall creates a lack of appetite, or that people just bear the fact that the UK, London, is an attractive place, it's a good place to invest for a whole host of reasons, and people accept things like, say, stamp duty being where it is as part of that picture? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I still see a lot of people wanting to come to the UK and take advantage of the non-dom rules, which does give them 15 years of the remittance basis. I guess there are people who have left as well because of the changes. I've certainly had some clients who've said, I've just had enough, I'm going away and I'm not coming back. And they have gone to all sorts of other jurisdictions. And there are now a few other European countries that offer something a bit similar to the UK. And I think we have to be mindful that if we push too hard on those kind of individuals, they will go somewhere else, in spite of the fact that the UK is still a very attractive location to live in.
I guess you can't rule out people who leave coming back, can you? I mean, just because they go to Portugal for a few years or somewhere else doesn't mean that they won't be sat in Lisbon thinking, oh, I'd rather, I actually miss the scene or contacts they had in London. And clients multiple properties. The residency position is just complex, isn't it? Despite COVID and the interruption we've had to travel, people have been used to being more mobile, which I guess presents a challenge for the tax authorities, doesn't it? Not in how residence is defined, because many countries like the UK have that well defined, but the way clients live is different, isn't it, I think, to in previous generations.
It is. I think if somebody does go away just because of the tax situation, there is quite a big risk that where they go will just not be somewhere they want to live. Once they've been there a while, they'll be looking, well, maybe I want to come back to the UK after all. So anyone who's looking at advice for leaving, it's very important that we give them the advice and say, look, if you come back in 5 years, all of what you've done is going to be taxed. So you have to really take on board that you need to find somewhere that you really want to live. But they can still visit a bit, and at least with the statutory residence test, we can now tell them, this is the number of days you can come to the UK. You mustn't come any more than this, or you will be resident here again. And then you've got UK tax on all sorts of things that you thought were going to be tax-free from a UK point of view.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, Rakesh, just to bring you in, I mean, you're leading a new kind of family office service at Buzzacott. We've heard from Maggie there some of the complexity of being, UK resident non-dom, managing some of the, multi-jurisdictional issues there. I mean, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the new family office offering and why you think it's relevant in the market today.
Well, we've been looking at the family office for quite a while in terms of how we sort of portray it and build out of it. So we decided that we're going to launch it in the next few weeks. And the idea behind it is we offer a number of services through Buzzacott, be it corporate tax, US tax, personal tax, HR services, working with charities. But the one thing that we value is working with our external parties, so the offshore trustees, for example, offshore corporate providers, immigration lawyers that provide private client as well as corporate lawyers. So the family office service is meant to be designed there for us to join up with various other partners out there, such that we can offer full service to clients. I look after a number of wealthy families, and although they need tax requirements for me, but they also have other issues in terms of the kids want to go to education in the US, the kids want to go to education in Europe. Now we've seen a more global environment where we see kids not be in the same jurisdiction as the parents. We've got a lot of clients through West Africa who send their children over to the UK because our education system is second to none in that respect. What does that mean? So a lot of them, we've got one client at the moment who's looking to bring his two children over to the UK, but his wife's going to come across to the UK. So we've said to him, be very careful, because you need to watch how many days you can come and visit them in the UK. Days that you come, because at the moment you're Nigerian resident, but if you start creeping over to the UK very often, you might end up being UK resident, which is a totally different ballgame. So one of the processes in terms of doing the family office services is when they come over to the UK, we help them in the tax advice in terms of structuring their assets, both in their home country and in the country they moved in this case, the UK. But we also help them in terms of working with partners for education needs. For example, if they need to be put into schools, we'll speak to some of the schools that we work with, or people that can get them into them. The other thing that we're seeing an increase in demand for is what are called consular services. So it's helping kids sometimes come over here, they go to boarding school, for example. So they're trapped in their boarding school, they get taught by the boarding school, they do what the boarding school tells them. What they don't experience is their external world out of living outside London, the experience that the multicultural element that we have in London. And some of the challenges that children have been sort of on their own for long periods of time in the UK, but they can't see their parents because their parents are busy in their home jurisdiction. So we have counsellors help them through that process in terms of guide them what they should be doing, what the experiences should be doing, and also where they've got questions that they don't necessarily know that the family may understand because it's a different culture. They help them through that process of understanding what it means to be living in Britain, what are the cultural issues, because that's quite a big challenge for people that come to the UK, particularly if they come from the Far East or come from Africa, is dealing with those cultural issues to fit in more than anything else.
So it's a lot more holistic than your traditional tax advisory or accounting piece, isn't it? To make it easy for clients to manage their affairs in one place. As you say, there's a lot to juggle.
And it's really good for a client because the client may not necessarily have the expertise or know the know-how or the people to contact. And it's quite good for them to be able to go to one person and say, right, and I've got this issue. Is there anyone that you know? And I can go, here's 1 or 2, 3 people that you can speak to about those various issues. But matching up with the personalities more than anything else, that match with the client, which is really important, because they have to have that connection and belief that the advice that they're getting is truly independent and looking after their best interest. And that's the one thing that the family officers are really trying to focus on, is trying to get what's best for the client, understanding what their needs are. So a lot of the process is actually sitting down with the client. So when I'm a tax specialist, but one of the things I do more than anything else is I don't talk about tax to start off with. There's a number of clients we spoke to this week, and I go, what are you trying to achieve? What's your objectives? Let's start with that. And then we can build the tax parameters around it, make sure it fits in with your lifestyle that you're trying to achieve. And it's complicated affairs. I've got clients that have gone through divorce in the past, and now concerned about wealthy assets going down to the children. What would happen, the impact of their divorce? Do they want to put a structure in place? This is their second marriage. They got married. They got children from the first marriage. How does that impact? What should they be doing through their wills? So there's a number of conversations that they can have, but you've also got to sort of guide them through that process of what are the options out there.
And I guess UK real estate is a big part of that picture, isn't it? Is not only the tax position on that, but finding the property, financing it, doing things, helping provide that complete set of advisors who can help, and finding the right property, if they're going to be resident here, is one of the major things, isn't it, that people need guidance on?
Well, there's a number of things to think about when you're looking at property. So the first stage we look at is structure. What structure should we be looking at? And I still see clients coming on board where they've got a basic offshore company structure, looking to buy a residential property in the UK and not being aware of ATED. But one come through the door that hasn't done ATED for the last 7 years. So he's got interest and penalties raising on that. He now wants to de-envelope when he should have probably looked to de-envelope years ago. So some of these structures, as Maggie was saying earlier on, they need to be kept regularly checked upon. And almost a health check on each of them on a regular basis. So don't think that if you've got a structure in place today, it's going to be effective for the next 10, 20 years. It's more often than not, it will change every couple of years, the way the government's working at the moment. But also when you're looking at property at the moment, we were talking to some of the private bankers working on the credit side. There's been a big push, because obviously the property market's had a bit of an increase because of the stamp duty change that they're coming in, at the moment, ending in March. So there's a big push at the moment for people to be looking to buy property in London at the moment, and prices have been shifted upwards. But the issue now is getting hold of a mortgage has become increasingly difficult. And those where you can get mortgages because you've got a decent amounts of LTV. The problem now is timing. These mortgages are taking 2-3 months to get through. And bear in mind the deadline's the end of March. Some of these deals may not get across because the mortgage won't be put in place. And I notice increasingly more the lenders are now asking for, the estate agents are asking for copies from the lender to say that they are going to lend the money to you in time. Otherwise, they won't even let you see the property. There's a direct shift there.
Very interesting. I mean, also, is part of the offering looking at holistic wealth reporting, so looking at a client snapshot picture of wealth across financial assets, property, luxury, art, yachts, jets, cars, things like that. Is that part of the offering? Because I imagine that's pretty valuable with clients with assets spread, just having a kind of single snapshot of their exposure in different asset classes is relevant.
That's exactly what we're looking to do. So we're working with our financial planning team to produce effectively a report which is set out. What I call it is this is your life book, basically. We haven't worked on what the name's going to be yet. I think we might have to put that to a competition, so I can't make my mind up on it. So if anyone's got any great ideas, please let me know. But basically what it's meant to do is what I used to do when I worked in the Channel Islands. We used to have effectively, when we used to go to trustee meetings, we used to list out all the beneficiaries of the trust, where they're located, then set up all the assets, whether it's within the trust, whether it's in their personal name, whether it's family assets, whether it's company assets. So the client has one snapshot of what the family wealth is. And what does that mean in terms of what were they going to do for the next year, what they're going to do for the next 5 years. So it's an evolving plan. So every year when we have the trustee meeting, we would update that plan and say, has anything changed? Have your children's intentions changed? and what does that mean in the overall picture. Now, one of the important things that we picked up as we were going along is a lot of ultra high net worth individuals will have investment portfolios with maybe 4 or 5 different investment managers, all working in silos because they're not allowed to speak to or aren't aware of what the other portfolio is doing. They all produce exactly the same risk rating, exactly the same portfolios. So effectively, we've got 5 times risk on those portfolios, identical things because they don't know what anyone else is doing. And what we're going to be able to achieve is we're probably going to look to get all those portfolios fed into our system, so then we can risk weight across the 5 portfolios, so the client can see what the overall risk portfolio is. They're not necessarily the individual managers if that's what they want to keep the segregation. That's quite valuable for them to see where, particularly now when we see markets dropped off 30-40% in March and now just bounced back to a larger extent. That gives them a snapshot of where their risks are and to manage that risk through the portfolios.
And that's interesting as well, I guess, because from your position, you're not trying to gather AUM yourself. So although multiple banks could say, well, we can replicate the picture across your various relationships, the client could be a bit nervous that bank then is going to try and use it to gather assets, whereas from your independent position, you can give them the purview without that kind of conflict. So I'm sure that's going to be very interesting as it develops.
And it's a really important document, as I say, because it's good to look back at those documents. So, what we do when we go to the meeting, we'll have the document that we had a year ago and go, well, what's happened in that last year? What's the performance over the last year? But also, what's changed? And I can tell you the amount of conversations I've had over the last 6 months with COVID. And if you said to me a year ago, most clients would tell me, I'm invincible, I'm not going to die, I don't need to think about it. That position has totally changed now, where clients are now looking at wills. There are a number of clients that didn't have any wills in place but were multimillionaires. Because they just said, well, it doesn't really matter, I've got trust structures and all the rest of it. I think now people are starting to realize they are not invincible anymore. Something like COVID is indiscriminate to a larger extent. It can get you, and let's make sure we'll have a plan in place so there isn't an issue going forward. And the number of people now come back and looked at trust structures, looked at wills, revisited them, and actually now carrying out actions rather than just saying, well, I'll look at it at some later point when I have some time, has certainly changed.
Okay, well, Rakesh, Maggie, many thanks for talking to me today. I look forward to sharing this with our members and encourage them to reach out to you both if there's any interest in further discussions around your services for offshore trustees or the new family office services that Buzzacott are launching. So we'll share the news of that launch with our members as we go through. So thanks for talking to me today.